Welcome to the Morrison Report. Hosted by Davellemorrison Morrison, sales representative for Bosley Real Estate Limited Brokerage. Ms. Morrison has co-authored the best-selling book, Success Today, with Brian Tracy, and has been interviewed on NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliates by Bob Guinea from The Bachelor. Davell, a real estate investor, has spoken to many attendees at her real estate seminars and is currently ranked in the top 5% of agents in her brokerage. Join me in welcoming your host, Davell Morrison.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really wanted to create the Toronto Real Estate Market Insights to talk about everything that's fascinating about real estate. Real estate isn't just about buying and selling houses. There's so much more that goes into it and making the city a better place that we want to buy real estate in. So really wanted to create a podcast to talk about Toronto Real Estate Market Insights. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today. Today I have with us Michelle Sanaya. She is the co-founder and a director at the Laneway Project. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about the Laneway Project. What is that?
We're an independent planning and urban design not-for-profit that's working to improve Toronto's relationship with its laneways. So that's everything from the way we think about laneways to the way we regulate them, plan them, design them, and use them, and even build them.
Awesome. And so for clarification for people, what technically is a laneway?
A laneway is, I guess the simplest way to put it is a little street. They're ubiquitous throughout the sort of pre-1930s part of Toronto, and they're the narrow streets that run, sort of mid-block between the rows of buildings. So they're not the primary frontage of properties, but they're sort of secondary frontage, and they were put in place for servicing purposes for the properties that they go past.
Awesome. And so did you need to get any sort of city rules or bylaws or anything like that established for the projects that you're undertaking?
Well, the city does have some bylaws and other planning regulations around laneways, but part of what we're doing is aiming to sort of expand those and expand the range of what laneways can be in our neighborhoods. Because as I said, they were put in place purely for service and servicing reasons. But, at the moment, our city's changing, it's growing, and we're seeing, a lot of pressure on our public space infrastructure as we have more population going into neighborhoods.
Right.
So part of what we're doing is working with people at City Hall to sort of work out how to, frame and find an alternative and additional role for laneways.
Got it. And what can you give us an example of what are some of the things that you are doing in the laneways?
Yeah, well, so because, as I was mentioning, laneways are a bit of a sort of a blank spot in the planning policy at the moment, part of what we do and a big part of what our time is working on site-specific demonstration projects, like demonstration laneway improvement projects to show people some of the possibilities for laneways beyond a purely service. Things like, working with communities to do a full assessment of their laneways,
right.
And then develop a master plan for the long-term transformation, but then also more targeted things like, laneway greening projects or pop-up laneway activations or festivals. So that what those projects do is they really sort of allow us to work out how to do different things in laneways, and then from there, we work with people at City Hall, primarily in city planning and transportation services.
Right.
And we advise them on laneway-friendly planning policy so that then that can be written into things like our official plan or our low and mid-rise buildings guidelines and things like that. And then I guess the final piece is because there are 2,400 laneways in the city of Toronto, and
wow.
we can be as ambitious as we like, and we're never going to have a direct hand in improving all of them. But what we can do is develop toolkits. So as we work out how to do different things in laneways, like, green your laneway or add a laneway mural or, host a laneway event or name your laneway, we create free public planning resources, how-to guides, and we have those available on our website so that if people are thinking that they want to take on a bit of laneway improvement themselves, they've then got a sort of step-by-step guide on our site for how to do that.
Interesting. And so when it comes to, let's say, doing something like murals, how do you sort of source artists or determine what kind of artwork sort of suits the community and all the neighbors for that particular laneway?
Like in artwork as well as, all of our projects, it's so important to sort of get all of the different groups involved, working together and communicating together right from the start of a project. So if, for instance, a property owner would like a laneway on, the garage of their property or, the sidewall of their property,
right,
we work to connect them with, artists that, could potentially do that. And then typically the artist will speak to the property owner and sort of find out, if there's a particular subject or style or anything that they like. And then they'll typically produce, a couple of sketch possibilities for what that mural could be. And then, sort of have a conversation with the property owner to sort of work out precisely what will be going up on the building.
Awesome. And in terms of cost, who foots the bill for some of these special things?
It depends what the project is. We're an incorporated not-for-profit, so we've sort of got our eggs in many baskets in terms of funding projects. So some of them are grant supported, and whether that's, through a City of Toronto grant or Ontario Trillium Foundation, or sometimes corporate grants. And then sometimes, particularly things like events, are often rely on corporate sponsorship. And then as well as that, sometimes we use more conventional sort of fee-for-service sort of funding of a project. So it really is sort of tailored to what the specific project is, and sometimes there's a couple of different funding sources for a given project.
Right. And in terms of if you're doing an event, what kinds of events would you say that you've done before in the past, just to kind of give our listeners an idea?
Well, we've done street art days, so where we've coordinated with a lot of property owners along a given stretch of laneway and had sort of a day or an afternoon where just there's a whole bunch of murals being painted on the same day. Okay. We also did this past summer a series of 5 laneway crawls, which are sort of community festivals, but rather than being in the street, they're in the laneway. So then, we had a whole range of people and organizations from the community out in the laneway in the sort of parking paths adjacent to the laneway, leading free interactive participative activities. So it really transformed the laneways into community public space for the afternoon.
Very cool. Now, do you have an issue with cars and people trying to get through the laneway while you're doing these events?
Not generally. People are pretty practical. I mean, we always do a sort of door-to-door or flyer drop prior to the event.
Right.
At the beginning of the process, but also, the day before the event, just reminding people, between the hours of 2 and 6, tomorrow, please try not to drive in the laneway. But if people do have to get in or out, that generally if they see hundreds of people in the laneway, they're not going to be trying to go through at 60 kilometers an hour. They slow down. And similarly, the pedestrians that are in the laneway just sort of, they see a car coming, they move off to the side of the laneway, let the car through. Because, I guess no one wants to be hit by a car and no one wants to hit anyone with a car.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And what about the greening? You were talking about some of the greening that you do in the laneways. Can you give us some examples of what you do on the greening front?
Yeah, well, this past summer we've done a couple of actually quite different types of greening projects. So one is very sort of infrastructural in nature. We worked with David Suzuki Foundation to cut out the impermeable concrete from the central drainage channel of laneways and install sort of open cell pavers, so half solid, half open, and then soil and plants because that way rainwater falling in the laneway can percolate naturally into the soil rather than being rooted to the storm sewer.
Perfect.
So that's a sort of, very much a more sort of hard infrastructure project. We actually partnered on that one as well with the Beautiful Streets team at Transportation Services at City Hall. But then we also did a cross-street greening project. So we worked with the Harvard Village Residents Association and, again, the David Suzuki Foundation to do a series of planters along Croft Street in Harvard Village. And so that was a very, very much a more bottom-up project.
Very cool. And how did you guys get the idea to start something like the Laneway Project? Where did it come from?
Well, myself and my co-founder, Ariana Cancelli, we both have backgrounds in architecture, urban design, and planning, and it's sort of the classic thing. As soon as you're working in a space, you become more aware of it. So we were doing, public space projects and sort of community-based planning and design projects, and just sort of were increasingly aware of these spaces that seem to be very underused in our city fabric. And so we decided to, first before, deciding to found the Laneway project, we thought, okay, well, let's talk to our contacts at City Hall and in, different practicing professionals just to find out, is anyone actually addressing these spaces, or is there maybe sort of an opening for an organization to sort of form itself around the improvement of these spaces? And so it was in May 2014 that we sort of came to the conclusion that yes, there is a space for this, and no one is yet addressing it. So we decided to form the organization.
Awesome. And how many people do you guys have there working there?
Very few. You can do a lot with a small team.
That's awesome.
So I'm pretty much full-time on it. Ariana is, 1.5 days a week. And then we've got Philip, who's our planner, who's probably about 2 days a week on it. And then Katrina, who does our digital communications. And then apart from that, we've got a team of volunteers that sort of are involved on a project-related basis or on a task-related basis. And then we've also got a board of directors of 5 people, Ariana and I, and then also some other planners and, people with backgrounds in tech. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great. And how have you found the support in the city for this?
We found it to be really great. Like, we thought that we were going to have, to an extent, a bit of an uphill battle just because of, I guess, the natural resistance of people to sort of changes to the status quo. But we've been surprised at just the degree and the sort of universality of buy-in to the improvement of laneways. Because I think that if you look at the state of laneways in the city and just see the fact that a lot of them are, they're poorly lit, they're dirty, they don't really have an active role in their communities. And then at the same time, you look at the fact that our population is growing and, people want to live in precisely the neighborhoods that have a lot of laneway. So I think that there's a whole confluence of factors really made it sort of the time for laneways in the city, or the time to sort of think a bit more creatively about the spaces that we do have. And I don't think that that's confined to laneways either. I think that we're seeing that, in a bunch of different sort of rethinkings of some of the things that we take for granted in our public space.
Perfect. That's cool. And then have you noticed other cities doing something like this? Do other cities utilize their laneways?
Very definitely. And we've actually got a few great examples that we've been drawing on. One of the most famous or the most prominent of those is Melbourne in Australia, where, 20 years ago, their laneways were, in a worse state than Toronto's, really. They were just neglected, they were unsafe, they were dirty, and that was sort of the state of a lot of their central business district.
Right.
20 years ago, the municipal government actually, formally decided that, for the health of their city, they needed to revitalize the pedestrian realm in their downtown. And so they've been doing that for the past 20 years. And from being a liability, their laneways are actually a primary draw to their city. They've got, micro retail, cafes, bars, shops along them. And they have really turned into vital public spaces. And so that's, I guess, a very sort of complete approach to it, where they were looking at getting some of the fundamentals right, like lighting, paving, garbage collection, in getting those right, sort of unlocking the spaces to be used, as a vital part of their downtown. But then you also look at cities, here in Canada, like Montreal, where they've got a program, their Eco-Quartier programs, or Eco-Neighborhood. And as part of that, they've got a Green Laneways program. So the municipal staff work with and support communities in turning their laneways into sort of shared backyards. So sometimes that's, greening, sometimes that's, organizational, sort of organizing the community to sort of work together to steward these spaces. And yeah, that's I guess an example of a much more grassroots level type of project, because the city of Montreal is not telling people what their green laneway will be. People are nominating it and deciding what they want that space to be themselves.
Interesting. Now, are there considered to be, let's say, high-profile laneways in Toronto? Like, is there the ultimate laneway that you guys would really love to do a big project with?
Yeah, well, one that I'm sure everyone knows about is Rush Lane, or Graffiti Alley.
Okay. Whereabouts is that?
That's an interesting one, not just because that, it's in the sort of Queen and Spadina area, and it does get a lot of attention just because of the proliferation and quality of